I started following Judd Apatow on Twitter because I got excited by the fact that he was casting Graham Parker in This Is 40. And I'm a huge fan of Graham Parker, probably second only to Elvis Costello as being an influence on me when I was a teenager in the 80s. And it was exciting to see someone around my age, that is, Judd's age, give Graham Parker, who had been somewhat forgotten, a shot. And then Judd and I met briefly, I think, earlier this year at the Vanity Fair Oscar party. But besides that, we've never really talked. But you're in today, and I wanted to talk about, the state of the art. I wanted to talk about girls, and I wanted to talk about movies a little bit. Yesterday, in the New York Times, A.O. Scott ran a long piece talking about what does the idea of the cinephile mean in its current usage when TV and video games have surpassed movies in terms of a kind of cultural relevance. The term cinephile seems almost antiquated, according to Scott. And I read this article, and I felt, as someone who wants to love movies, somehow embarrassed by this reality. And I guess that means you are of a certain age, that this hits you on a certain level, especially someone who came of age in the golden age of the movies of the 1970s with people like Hal Ashby and Robert Altman and other even more commercial directors still being able to unleash a personal vision within a kind of mainstream context. But I think A.O. Scott was right in this piece, but I didn't like it. And it reminded me of something that happened maybe 15 years ago when I was having a conversation with two friends who were screenwriters and who were getting ominous signs from each of the studios that they were working in that the global marketplace will dictate what kind of American movies are made. That the studios will basically only make movies that cost roughly $500 million, including marketing, and they will release the film in about 25,000 theaters around the world, aiming to make $1 billion, and then the movie will be out of its theatrical run within weeks and will be available to you on demand. And this seemed very far-fetched to me in 1998, but it kind of happened. And the question is, does anyone really care that this is where we've ended up? With 10 weeks at the end of the year to pile on the prestige pictures to win awards. But have we stopped feeling that American films are special? I'm beginning to think it's time just to kind of man up and move on, and that things have a shelf life, and that maybe movies had their shelf life, that they really became popular in the 1920s. It kind of peaked in terms of an art form and are now kind of feeling disposable. You create content, you make movies. What is your feeling about the state of the art right now? I mean, I would imagine because of your success, somewhat optimistic. But
yeah, well, I think everything is disposable. I think that's what it's evolved into. Kids today, they don't know Carol Burnett existed. They don't even know All in the Family happened. It's turning over very quickly, and I find that troubling since I'm making things, and I hope people will pay attention to them for longer than the first 6 months after I make them. But I do have a sense that we all need to accept that as a result of how much is being creative, very little will have long-term impact on people. I mean, ask a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old if they've ever heard of MASH. They don't even know what you're talking about. They don't even know that was a show.
I met a 26-year-old over the weekend who had never heard of Montgomery Clift. So, yeah. Yes, and yeah, I get that.
Oh, forget that. I mean, that's to go. I'm saying things in the 70s don't exist anymore. I think to get a kid to sit down and watch a black and white movie is almost impossible. Very early, I tried to force my kids to watch a few things. Oh, let's watch Modern Times or some film that was meaningful to me. But I don't know if in a culture where there's so much content that you can expect kids to dig that deep. I mean, if you're in the arts, maybe you would, but a normal kid is not going to hunt down, Bringing Up Baby. It'll be pretty rare, and I'm not sure what that means. I guess, I'm always in an existential funk. I think everything is on the trash heap of reality. So if it lasts an extra 10 years or 20 years, does it really matter? Is it about the moment when people experience something and that's it? There's a moment when they sit in a movie theater and they have a powerful reaction to Fruitvale Station. And does it matter if 30 years down the road, almost no one is watching it? I don't know, but I think that is all we can think about. It's just everything is of its moment now, and there aren't going to be many Godfathers in the future.
Right, but does that make you, as someone who creates content, approach creating content in a different way? Does it alter the way that you approach an idea or a subject? The creative input you might have had on something like Bridesmaids, which seemed very... what was appealing about that was it felt like a long form comedy. It had digressions, and it went places that did not fit a certain beat. It seemed more in its feeling and its texture almost like a 70s movie in terms of how long it decided to stay with the character, how long scenes played out. I mean, obviously you're thinking of the content and not necessarily how it plays too.
That is how I look at it. It's as soon as I begin a project, I have to stop thinking about everything but that story or that film. I have to drop the whole idea that anyone is ever going to see it. I have to get rid of all of my anxiety about pleasing the studio and, on some level, even the audience. And I just have to live in that world and figure out how to make this story honest and make sense and original in a way that satisfies me. Then when the movie's over, everything returns, and suddenly you're in marketing meetings and you become obsessed with how do I get people to see this. But in that period of creation, everything has to disappear. Because when I'm in between projects, I could sit around and think about how nobody watches this show or that that movie that I made anymore, and get really depressed. But that's just pure ego. That's how I think I am important as a person on earth. That's how I deal with all of my spiritual emptiness, which is I'm important because people like this shit I make, and if people seem to like it less, or if it disappears quicker, then it hurts my whole concept of how I'm fighting against reality. But that's all bullshit, and I do better mentally when I'm just writing or creating something. Everything else is just how do I fight my fear of existence.
Yes.
And that, I mean, it sounds depressing and intense, and it is in a lot of ways. But I only feel great in the moment regarding creativity. I only feel great in the moment I think of something or something is coming together. All the debate, like the A.O. Scott debate, that only brings me down.
It does.
Regardless of what side of the debate I'm on. Because I could give a shit if people like TV or movies. Mm-hmm. I mean, is TV better than movies? I don't know. I've watched 12 great movies in the last 2 months that blew my mind. I watched Short Term 12 the other night.
Saw that you tweeted about that.
And what an amazing movie. And there's not a lot of TV as good as that movie. And sure, there's a few shows that are good. Let's say there's 4 that are really unbelievable. But there's still an enormous amount of movies, especially this year with Captain Phillips and 12 Years a Slave. I haven't seen American Hustle yet. There's so many movies now that people need shit to write about. That's what the internet is about, is you have to write the article about TV versus movies. But it ultimately doesn't mean anything. I mean, I could debate it all day long, the idea of, do the studios care so much about reaching audiences in Russia that they're not going to get behind Fruitvale Station? And that is what's happening. But I also think, Fruitvale Station is going to be on every TV on Earth. And so is that any different than when nobody watched Harold and Maude? Because more people will probably see Fruitvale Station in the next few years than saw Harold and Maude when it came out. So in some ways, they're not behind these small movies, but they are making them accessible to everybody.
I think it's interesting that you are optimistic about this year in movies. If we want to like head into that section of the conversation, I've never been more depressed by American movies this year, and I've seen all the movies that you're talking about, and I really have not seen a single film that I could wholly recommend without any reservations. The closest I've come to that, I would say, is I liked Before Midnight by Richard Linklater, and I liked Frances Ha, the Noah Baumbach movie, and I liked Drinking Buddies by Joe Swanberg. I would have to say those roughly in my top three. Interestingly enough, all movies about basically a woman involved, a kind of difficult woman involved with a guy, and kind of their journey in a way, and also relationship movies. I'm usually drawn toward a bigger kind of pop spectacle movie, not necessarily an action hero movie, but even when Scorsese really hits it and makes that kind of rock.
Maybe he did.
Movie.
You haven't seen
we haven't seen it. No, we haven't seen The Wolf of Wall Street. And no, but a troubling thing that I saw emerging in American movies this year was a kind of victimization cinema, where we are taken through the world where a person is victimized, and we were supposed to see ourselves mirrored in it, and it's supposed to be kind of an ennobling experience. And I think Fruitvale Station plays into that. I think a lot of the black-themed movies of this year, in this Obama moment, in this Trayvon moment, which is, I think, what really got Fruitvale Station noticed by more people than it would have, was that it coincided with the Trayvon Martin case. But I don't know. I found a lot of those movies, for me, just lacking in a kind of cinema that I want, I guess. And I think Fruitvale Station, for example, is a very problematic movie because I think it kind of whitewashes his life, tries to make him better, perhaps, than he really was. And there were moments in it that I really thought were way, way, way too on the nose, with the daughter asking him on the night before he goes out, "Daddy, I don't think you're coming back tonight. I'm not sure." And, you know, it also poses this question that the cop shot him on purpose, whereas the cop says he reached for his taser. And you have two cops out of a central horror movie coming into the subway station, victimizing and berating these kids who obviously did nothing at all to warrant this. So you already have this victimization narrative playing itself out in Fruitvale Station. And I really came to the end of it thinking, okay.
See, I interpreted it completely differently than that. I understood that who knows what the cop was thinking. So I thought that came across. We don't know if to me, it just seemed like he panicked in some form, whether he thought he grabbed for a taser or a gun. It seems like you would know the feel of your taser. But regardless, he panicked in some way. And if you put a gun in my hand and I was in a situation where a lot of people were yelling and it felt dangerous, there's a pretty good chance I might fire by accident. I get what that is, especially for me as someone in life who tends to choke. I can see that panic. But what I took from that movie, and for me all that matters is if it touched me, because I'm sure it doesn't capture exactly who the man was exactly. But what I like in movies, and what I liked about that movie, was that we read about people dying every day, people getting hurt, terrible things happening, and we just don't feel anything for them. It doesn't mean anything. So we will hear this many thousands of people died in the Philippines, and we can just flip to the next section on Huffington Post and give that 90 seconds or 2 minutes. And what I liked about Fruitvale Station was the basic idea of, here's someone you would never think twice about, and now I'm going to make you sit down and realize that he was a human being, good and bad, and that this is a tragedy, but they're all tragedies. And in a larger sense, life can be tragic for all of us. We're all headed towards a bad situation.
Yes.
And so that's what moves me is I do connect with the guy because the actor was excellent, Michael Jordan. And I don't get caught up. Yes, there's moments where you think, oh, they're setting me up to be depressed later. But I feel like that's happening in life right now. The way I kissed my wife goodbye this morning, if I drop dead today, she could add some significance to how I said, we'll talk later. Right, hun? So I think we're doing that all day long. Everything could be interpreted that way. And that's all I look for in movies, is to be moved and touched. Are there movies I wish they were making? Do I wish Hal Ashby was around making Being There? Yes, there is no Being There. There's no one coming close to doing what he did. But I don't necessarily think that that's because there's something wrong with American movies. I think it's because Hal Ashby is dead. And every once in a while we luck into a certain artist that hits his vein, and then you get Coming Home, and you get Harold and Maude, and
Shampoo. Last Detail. Yeah.
But I don't think that is necessarily the business being closed off to those people, because movies are cheap enough to do that. If you're Hal Ashby and you're born today, you're going to find a way to make a movie, even if you're like Lena Dunham and you make it for $45,000. You can make those movies. So I think we have good periods and bad periods. I like victimization stories. I like 12 Years a Slave. I like the idea that no one has made great slave movies, and he decided to do it. It happened to time out in the culture, as it often does, with political events that make its significance larger. But I'm glad that I was told that story. And I never think about, the fact that I wish there was a Punch Drunk Love this year. I just think, wow, there's 6 or 7 movies that I was excited to watch, and I had a pretty good time. And then I go back to my typewriter.
Well, I find it hard to have a pretty good time during Fruitvale Station for some reason. And I'm with you. I do like a movie like that. It just depends on how far you've ramped up the manipulation.
Yeah.
And if it becomes distracting to you.
Yes.
And I think in terms of, again, whitewashing Oscar's life in Fruitvale Station, where, yes, he's a drug dealer, but we see him throwing drugs away. Yes, he cheated on his wife, but he's really trying hard to get her back. He's got an intense bond with his daughter, and we see them. We see him riding, piggyback on him in slow motion after he's been shot in a flashback scene. We also see Oscar bond with a dog that gets hit by a car. I mean, there's a succession of things. We see him run into a person. So I'm with you to a certain degree, and maybe if there was a different take on it, a different kind of. If Fruitvale Station gave some larger meaning to this event that happened, where maybe you make the movie where you follow Oscar and you follow the cop who killed him and intercut them throughout the day, meeting up, and then you go, okay, I'm seeing 2 cultures collide here. There's meaning here. I don't know what the meaning ultimately of Fruitvale Station was, except to make us get kind of pissed off at white people and kind of get angry that this innocent, beautiful young black man was senselessly slaughtered by a white monster in a train station outside of Oakland. I mean, I don't know if the movie has a larger context than that.
But you can interpret it any way you want. I guess for me, I just interpret it like, we're all headed towards that train station, one way or the other.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
But that's just my personal problem, that I feel like bad things are coming. There's the bad thing that happened to him, and we need to appreciate life and be good people. And I also, although I understand what you mean about laying it on too thick, which everyone has a different line for.
True.
I understand what you're talking about, but I do feel like that is what life's about. It is about how you feel around your kid. It's about trying not to be a douchebag. It's trying to decide if you're going to be an honest person or a dishonest person, and that everyone is struggling with those choices, and every drug dealer is struggling with those choices. I'm sure most of them wish they turned into Jay-Z, and it's not really happening for them. And it doesn't mean that they're not as sweet as Jay-Z seems to be sometimes. It just doesn't work out for people. And so in a way, for me, it became symbolic of everyone's attempt to get through the day. But that's how I look at my work. My work, that is all I am trying to do, is show people, just trying to get through it, trying to make it work as well as they can, and that life is an obstacle. I mean, everyone is dealing with, in different eras, you're dealing with different problems, and even for people whose lives are going well, you might have enormous problems with your family, or you might have someone sick in your family. There's always something happening, and so I'm always rooting for people. That doesn't mean I don't also love dark comedy, because I like that as well. But when I sense a good heart from a filmmaker, it means something to me. And I guess I feel like, we have the Beatles, so we don't get The Godfather every year. We're not going to get any more Beatles albums. And when it happens, I'm happy, but I never feel like I'm getting screwed that it's not happening. I have my eyes open for the moment when something incredible happens.
Yeah, I mean, you do have to be an optimist on that level in terms of dealing with the content that the culture keeps, this avalanche of content that keeps burying us. And how do we find that movie? How do we find that, song or whatever that means something to us?
And if it means something to us, does it matter if it doesn't mean anything to anyone else? That's what I always think about. I can listen to a Loudon Wainwright song and bawl my eyes out and be deeply moved by it, or by something by Graham Parker. And does it matter if 50 million people like it or 8? Because that is what's happening in a lot of the cultures. A lot of the things that we love reach much fewer people, but it doesn't take away their importance.
Yes, I agree with that. I want to just go back briefly, because I want to ask you about two things about 12 Years a Slave. What did you think about the last scene?
When he left and has to leave...
No, the final scene in the movie.
When he's reunited with everybody?
Yes.
The fact that he's how overcome with emotion he is, and just the performances of that type of moment.
Or just why is that moment there?
Well, on one level it's there because I assume it happened. He did get reunited with his
And by
his
the way,
family.
guys, this is not a spoiler alert. It's called 12 Years a Slave. So he is a slave for 12 years. So we're not spoiling anything by this.
Yes. Well, that's what makes the movie watchable, is you understand that this is going to end at some point.
Not soon enough. I thought it was very difficult to sit through. But
well, let me ask you this, because just as a person, is there any part of you that thinks, as painful as this is for me to watch, it probably was way worse this isn't even close to as bad as it was for an enormous amount of people who experienced slavery. And so it's fine to experience this because it barely touches on the pain that people went through. And that's how I watch it. I just thought, I know this is a compressed reality. I know you can't do everything in 2 hours. But there were moments when a lot of people woke up in the morning or at the end of the day and they were told, you didn't get enough done today, and awful things happened to them. And I liked having that put back in my consciousness, both because it's an important part of our history, and also to understand the psychic scars that continue to this day from the descendants of those people. You understand how that does not disappear quickly from a country and how we treat our citizens.
yeah, I think that's all true. That's all true. I think it depends on how you react to or respond to this kind of very rigid formalism that 12 Years a Slave is imbued with, and that is Steve McQueen's filmmaking style, whether it was in Hunger or Shame or now in 12 Years a Slave. I think it depends on how you can juxtapose the subject matter and his very cool, almost chic compositions, formalism, camera movements. And you can either be really blown away by it, I think, or you can back off a little bit and go, I don't know. Now that's, of course, being very critical and having that kind of eye and sitting there and having that particular thing bother you, that the very uptight British artist who's a control freak, is going to a plantation and, again, using Michael Fassbender as an incredibly effective performance, but still we are more or less in an upscale Mandingo film in a way, in terms of there's the crazily religious white slave owner who's whipping the young girl while swigging the whiskey and holding the bottle.
But do you think that didn't happen?
I do think it happened. Look, I think Fruitvale Station, no matter how much it kind of rewrote its surface stuff because it wanted to be a kind of, I don't know, an acceptable vision of the world that people could sit in the theater and watch, rather than probably what the harsher reality of that whole life was like. And I think it gets to it in one scene in that movie. It's a scene where he's visited by his mother in jail. I'm talking about Fruitvale Station. And that's the only moment in the movie where when he bursts into anger at the other inmate who's kind of goading him. And Michael Jordan then really does get great in that, because he switches from being the nice boy who's pleading for his mother and then to a rage-filled youth.
Yeah.
And that was, I wanted to see more of that movie, and I wanted to see more of that Oscar, and then I think I would have gotten or understood the experience of Fruitvale Station. But just because someone does something, I don't know if that automatically gives it a stamp of like, oh yeah, okay, I'm down with it then. Yes, it was probably much worse than that. I think I'm just really not talking about the subject matter, because the subject matter makes talking about this movie so rigged in a way. It's such a difficult thing to get over, to have your aesthetic complaints about a film when it's about this. It's kind of in your face. And honestly, if you don't really like the film, you could be branded a racist almost. I mean, it's played at such a high level that and people respond to it with such respect and dignity because of what it's about. And of course, that's a very kind of Hollywood, showbiz reaction. I mean, when it comes down to the Oscars this year, I'm sure it will be well rewarded.
Well, I understand everything you say. I mean, I think it's fine to criticize the movie. I don't think it implies anything. And I understand what you mean. But as a director, I also think when you bring a camera to a cotton field and you have a few people working there, it looks good. It looks good. It is a beautiful setting, and I think that's probably hard to avoid. It's hard to make that look any scrappier. It is. I didn't mind the fact that it looked beautiful, because I think that's what makes it all so horrific. You have these people in this incredible setting treating other people so awfully. And I'm also fascinated that people were cool with that. I mean, in its simplest form, millions of people found a way to be okay with that. And we talk about World War II and the Holocaust. But so for hundreds of years, we did this. This wasn't a blip in our history. So more than half of our country was cool with doing this and slaughtering the Indians. And I think the idea that someone says, hey, remember this? Or this is an important part of our history, we should talk about it, is important. But I don't know. I liked it, and I didn't watch it thinking this would be better if. But also I thought, well, this man, he wrote a book about this experience. It's not like he was he had a personality that was avoided. There are different types of people who would react differently. Some people in that situation might have, it's a very stoic person, and people can react differently to that experience. But he did survive probably because of that, so it felt truthful to me because he did survive.
Well, it wasn't because, and I just want to say that it wasn't because the movie was beautiful lyrically. It was just the way Steve McQueen shoots in terms of the precision of his tracking shots. It wasn't that the plantation was beautiful. And of course, the whole that was what was creepy, legitimately creepy about the movie, and gave it a kind of horror movie feel while you're watching it.
This doesn't compare at all. When we were making funny people, Janusz Kaminski shot the movie, and one thing that was important to me was that the movie looked beautiful, because I was trying to say that just because you're very wealthy and have achieved some of your career goals doesn't mean you're happy. And so you have this miserable person living in this gorgeous fantasy land and this giant house and this crazy lawn, because that is the setting of a lot of very unhappy, successful people. And
it's very interesting you bring this up, because I was talking to someone at Thanksgiving, a woman I know, and her new British boyfriend. And I was saying that I was going to be talking to you next week. And we started talking about This Is 40, which is a movie that I really like. And the British guy had really liked it too. The woman had problems with it. And the woman was talking about how mainly she believed that it entered into kind of Nancy Meyers territory with the kitchen porn and the house porn and the interior decorator porn.
Yeah.
And she said, I just could not get over the fact that that couple would be living in that lifestyle, in that kind of world where considering what he does and considering what she does, she was confused by the idea that they could have, and that they could have like either refinanced or something. Yeah. Now, to me, that's not necessarily what the movie is.
But it's a part of it. And we debated it while we were making the movie. What kind of car should they drive? How nice should the house be? And what's funny about that, and that's been a criticism some people have had, it's like saying that people in nice houses don't have problems, or that people with nice cars don't go bankrupt. Everyone is trying to keep it together. You can lease a nice car. It's not that expensive to lease a Lexus, and you can get a great house and not be able to afford it. So that part about it seems silly. What it reveals to me is people are so mad at anybody who has any money. People are very upset about it. And this is one thing you notice on Twitter. People, if you talk about anything where people think you're revealing that you have some means, they just write white people problems, first world problems. And people, people work really hard, and they feel like if you can pay your bills, shut the fuck up. Deal with your problems. And the truth is, and it's something that most people will never understand, is sometimes achieving some of your goals or being financially stable only makes your problems worse, because you can't distract yourself with the fact that you're trying to achieve this financial goal. And now all you have is your psychic pain. And now people don't have a lot of sympathy for that. People don't sit around going, I feel bad for Sinatra because he was always so depressed. But it's just a fact of life that there's a lot of people who have many problems, and the fact that they can pay their bills doesn't change that. And if anything, the fact that you can pay your bills makes you more depressed because you thought that would solve it. And that's the old Elvis Presley problem. I mean, you don't have to be Elvis Presley to suffer from it. It's just one thing off your plate, and then you're still dealing with everything else, from your personal existential crisis to your family issues, your problems with your kids or your wife, or your terror for the future of the world. It's all sitting right there. And so that's what I wanted to say. And that's what's funny about it, because that was the point of the movie. They're in a nice house, and that does not make it okay. And two people, if they're not in perfect sync, who cares what house they're in? It's going to go down, and they're going to have to deal with the issues that come up between them. Yeah,
it seemed to me that reaction to that aspect of the movie seemed to be extremely literal-minded, and kind of had a logic that if you really applied logic to most movies, they all kind of crumble in a way, because they have each movie has its own movie logic to it. It doesn't really spread across.
Well, you have a mortgage. I mean, you could either pay it or you can't. So you could be in that house and be 3 months late on your mortgage and 2 months away from losing your house. So there's no real financial logic issue to it. But I think what it says is, I think people are saying, if I had their money, I'd be happy. And it's just not true. I'm 45 years old. I see a lot of people having major problems. They're getting divorced. People are dealing with a lot of illness in their families as they get older, and a lot of people can't afford to educate their kids the way they would like to, and it's really hard for people. And I think that just because you have a job doesn't mean you don't deserve any sympathy from other people. They've done all sorts of studies that people with less money are not any less happy than people with money.
And people with less money also are prone to make worse decisions than people who have money.
Are prone to make worse decisions.
Prone to, because they are particularly more stressed than those who didn't. And so that therefore they just grab,
Sure. And also getting a nice house and having a nice car and wearing a nice outfit is a way of not dealing with your problems for a lot of people. You keep thinking, well, if I could get this or I can get that, then I can deal with all of my emotional problems. But it doesn't work.
You recently tweeted, most super snarky people don't provide much more than snark. That mode seems to close the creative channel or reveal it doesn't exist. Where did that come from? What were you thinking of when you decided to tweet that? I mean, it's interesting, but I just want to know, was it something particular that was...
Well, when you talk about movies, you're very respectful of the people who made them. And you want to have a deep conversation about what works and what doesn't work cinematically for you. And I love that type of conversation, and I love that type of journalism and criticism about film. But if you're on any kind of social media, an enormous amount of people don't have any sense of what it takes to create things. And the terror you have to go through to offer it up to this Shark Tank. And I think people are very flippant about it. And most of those people won't ever do anything. Because you create and you've been through, positive reaction, negative reaction, just like me, all across the board. You have such respect for anyone who has the balls to do it.
Oh, yeah.
And it gives you a compassion for the courage it takes to put yourself out there. And I find that the people who do it thoughtlessly and in a cruel way are not creators. And so if I meet young people, college students, I always tell them that you have to tune into that, because the type of person who will thoughtlessly call something crap and make a good joke or a bad joke about it usually doesn't have the balls to sit down and write something.
Right. Well, not only write it, but as you said, reveal it to the world and see what happens. I mean, I think we've both been through certain instances where we presented something that was the reaction. I'm getting that reaction from it. Are you serious? This was not what I intended, but you have now the audience has constructed a new narrative that wasn't part of what I intended to do. But, I agree with you, because I do think that people are made up of their likes and their dislikes. And I'm interested in someone who just doesn't push the like button all the time. I like to hear people have opinions on things, whether they agree with mine or not. I would much rather have that kind of dialogue and that kind of conversation. So you didn't like a movie that I liked. I want to hear why, and let's talk about it a little bit, or a book or a band or whatever. I don't want to sit around with a bunch of people who are just agreeing with everything all the time. Everything's good. Everything gets an award. Everything should be nominated. Everything gets a gold star. It's just, but I do notice this, that if you start to, offer your opinion, and it might be negative about something, especially in social media, you're considered like a hater. But then what's interesting is that and I posted articles online before, and if you really want to see, and those articles have been critical of what I call the empire establishment. They've been critical of the gay community, which I'm a part of, and I have certain problems with how gay men are represented, and I've written about this. Comment boards. Do you ever go to comment boards? I go to the comment boards. I read the comment boards, and it is, look, I'm blackly cynical, and I am somewhat of a dark person, if you didn't know that already. Yes. But when I hit the comment boards, it's just, it's a whole new level.
It is, and then it always begs the question, who are those people? I'll say to friends, have you ever commented on any comment board? And so, say in the world of comedy, you're looking at comment boards. I always think there's basically about 30,000 people doing that, and they're filling up most of those comment boards. I don't feel like it reflects the majority of people's opinions. I think there's a lot more 13-year-olds doing it than anyone wants to discuss. There should be an age next to every comment, and and some of it is hilarious. I could read it all day long if it's not about me, but it's also really dumb most of the time. It's not very insightful. So whenever we make a movie, I have to say to everyone in my family and who worked on the movie, don't read that stuff, because it gets in you. It's toxic, and it does burrow inside and stay with you somehow and makes you feel bad. And so I try to avoid as much of it as I can. But every once in a while, you'll just see, why Judd Apatow sucks and Kevin Smith rules. And you can't help but read it for a little while. And if you're in the right space, you can eat it up all day long and enjoy it. But I'm about to start directing a movie.
Right.
I have to fortify myself, or I won't be able to do it. And my identity can get altered by how I look at myself based on reading too much. And I have to wipe it away to get to my creative core, or I won't be able to get there. I'll just be swimming in those voices.
I think that maybe I have this different way of dealing with it because really, from a very early age, I've gotten a lot of criticism. I mean, I think a lot of people forget that when my first book was published, the reviews were pretty much half and half. A lot of critics thought it was, how can you let a kid a drug addict publish his journals or whatever, which of course that's not what the book was, but a lot of people read it that way. And I remember that I had the armor that I was beginning to build against kind of a mindless critical reaction was being built in the workshops with other writers responding to my work when I first started showing my work to people in college. And that armor against that kind of criticism was built and then kind of fortified with the reaction to the novel American Psycho.
In a good way?
I think in a good way, because I can actually read the comment boards and distance myself from the terrible things that are said about me. And also there's some good things said about it too, but it doesn't really matter. It really, I can look at it and it doesn't really sting the way that the rest of life stings. Your normal everyday existence stings, dealing with your parents and my siblings and my friends and whatever problems and pain is going on in your life. That's one thing. It seems to me kind of, I don't know, so disposable in a way and so fleeting, the notion of the comment board.
Well, I have a couple of ways I deal with it. One is I think about high school, and I remind myself that there were 500 kids in my senior class, and of all of those kids, I probably liked 8 of them. And so if I go to a comment board, if I think I might connect with 8 out of 500 people, then I shouldn't expect, if everyone in my high school was writing on the comment boards, it would be 492 crazy stuff. And that makes me feel better. I also always, when I was a kid, when I first started writing, I always thought, most people don't buy Elvis Costello records. To me, Elvis Costello should sell 20 million albums. And everyone is buying, back in the day,
Foreigner, Journey,
whatever.
The Police.
And so that made me feel better, that you can do great work and you don't have to reach everybody. And also, it's okay if the people who don't buy it don't like it at all, because everyone's taste is different. I'll put something on and I'll be enjoying it. And sometimes Leslie will just turn to me and go, I can't do this right now. This is too whatever. This is too intense for me, or this is too violent for me. And it might be one of the great experiences of my life, but just based on what she's looking for in storytelling and in movies, she might connect with something else that I might not connect with. And then that's okay, because if I told everyone my opinions of the top 20 movies of the year, at least half of them that are beloved, I really dislike or didn't connect with, or don't care about at all. They didn't mean anything to me. And so why do I expect anyone to not feel that way about my work? Some people really connect. They'll see This Is 40 and they'll say, I feel like you hit a camera in my house and it made me and my wife appreciate each other more. And, they thank me. They talk about, this morning I got a tweet from someone who's talking about how nice his wife has been since they watched This Is 40 together. And I know that a lot of people have that reaction to it. And I know other people literally can't get through it. They think it's just people whining and it's annoying, and they do not find one moment funny in it. And it's unbearably long to them. And that's okay, because I feel that way about some of your favorite movies. But it's hard to stay in the pocket with that. I mean, I can say that, but when I read the nasty, snarky thing, I definitely take the ding, and depending on how my day's going, it might stay with me for 5 seconds, or it might stay with me for a month.
But haven't you? I mean, I do think that the work is simply the work, and it's what I'm interested in doing. It's not what my friend is interested in doing. It's not what my partner is particularly interested in doing. It's what I'm interested in doing, and I want to make it good, and I want to explore it as fully as possible. And really, at the end of the day, do you care what anyone thinks? I mean,
I do.
You do.
I do. I come from a world of comedy, which is if they don't laugh, you've failed, and if they don't connect, you've failed. But here's the thing: sometimes I'm very, very aware that that I'm doing things that go against what people want. So when we made Funny People, I knew that the idea that he gets better halfway through the movie and then he becomes a bigger asshole because he doesn't know how to handle surviving and he hasn't learned any lesson from it. It just spins him out. I knew that would bother people. And in my head, I'm thinking about Cassavetes movies and Altman movies, and I was very aware that I was going against the classic structure of a fucked up guy getting better and cheering him on. That I only let him get a teeny bit better in the last 15 seconds of the movie. But I was willing to absorb that because it felt truthful to me, and I couldn't change it because in knowing all of these people in comedy, I thought this is what it would be.
Well, look, I think one of the most real and honest scenes that you've filmed is that scene when Adam Sandler cannot stop looking at his phone, and they're trying to show the little girl's cats
singing cats.
And that to me was such a real moment that films, American movies, let alone a big American, a studio film, would ever go to. It was very specific, but it had a huge, much bigger meaning to it. I love Girls.
Thank you.
I tweet about it a lot. It's really exciting when it's on because unlike the Netflix model, there's something about having an ongoing conversation about a show over a period of 12 or 13 weeks where after every Sunday night, you find yourself in a contentious argument over the content of a show. And it lasts kind of until the next show. So you're on this you have this kind of continuing pleasure of the show rather than in that 10 or 12 hour, I don't eat, I don't bathe, I do nothing but stare at whatever that show is that I'm watching, that I'm binge watching. A different pleasure, but I'm kind of unsure on what the more persuasive model is in a way. I know, for example, that I cannot watch Mad Men over the course of its run any season, that I do need to watch that kind of as a novel. And also, I just don't feel that the kind of interaction between fans is a little bit more glazed in a way than the excitement over a Girls episode on a Sunday night, and immediately everything starts, pulsing. And you have that. I remember talking with people about the infamous Patrick Wilson episode where Hannah spends the weekend at the doctor's, literally for 2 or 3 weeks. And still it's not, if you bring up Girls and you start talking about it, that comes up. But I've noticed one thing. I find it very hard to get a lot of straight men to engage with the show and to watch it seriously. I have a trainer, very smart guy, college educated, starting his own business out, making some cash as a trainer, dates a lot of women. We have a very close relationship, and I started to come in on Mondays and talk about this show that I really loved. And he was going, "Oh, really? Maybe I'll have to check that out." And then it got to the point where I was insisting that he watch it, that you just have to watch the show, because I don't want to come in on Monday and I want to talk about this with someone. And you're probably the first person I want to see Monday morning after I go to bed Sunday night. And he said, "Okay, sure, yeah, I'll watch it." What was last week's episode? I said, "I want you to watch this episode where Hannah ends up with Patrick Wilson." It just is. I've watched it like 3 times. It's like a perfect short story. I think you'll really. For me, that's where you should kind of enter the show, because it's kind of a one-off and whatever. The next morning, I came into the gym, and he was just shaking his head woefully at me, just shaking his head, going, First of all, that would never happen in a million years. I don't get it. I don't know why you're obsessed with this show. I looked at some of the other, I flipped through my, Hulu or whatever, and watched some more of it. And, dude, that would just not, that girl would never, first of all, land that guy. And I don't know, who is this Lena Dunham? What is going on? What is she? And I said, well, so what is the problem here? Give me your main problem. He said, well, I guess the problem is that I guess I want to screw chicks that I see on TV and in movies, and that I'm into that and I respond to that. And I'm just thinking, well, can't you just jump off the cliff a little bit more?
But that's a personal trainer. That's a very specific person who can spend their whole day watching people work out and helping them count.
Yes, you have to be able to count, and yes.
Not that there aren't great personal trainers, there are, but it is a different mindset in a way. It's almost the exact opposite of the type of mind that might appreciate there are the pain and the levels and but you also might have a specific kind of personal trainer. My personal trainer likes a show, but I know what you mean. And I've heard this for many years. There are people who when we made Undeclared from Fox, would say we need more eye candy, and I think there are people who watch television or film because it's fantasy fulfillment. So when we made Freaks and Geeks, the NBC was very mad at us because we didn't see the show as fantasy fulfillment. We saw it as fantasy not fulfillment. And it was about what do you do when things don't work out most of the time. And in a way, Girls follows in that tradition. And I think some people like that, and they like seeing the different difficulties people have in life and how they deal with it. And other people like to see people conquer, romance work. They like the triumph of it. And like we were saying before, I get that. It never bothers me when someone says that they don't want that kind of entertainment at the end of a hard day. But I just personally, I like it. I like that Maude killed herself at the end of Harold and Maude. But I'm sure there's a lot of people who think that's something horrifying. And that's a movie that got a lot of terrible reviews, and people didn't go see it. But it's one of the most meaningful movies to me and a lot of people I know. So that's part of the reaction to difficult truths.
Well, would you remember Harold and Maude as much as you do now if they lived and drove off to San Diego or whatever?
Yeah. Well, that's what Cassavetes said, and this meant a lot to me. He when I read it, he said, I don't care if you like it when you saw it. I want it to stick in your craw so you're still kind of thinking about it 10 years later.
Right. It's like the famous story to the ending of Chinatown. Robert Towne had written an ending in his script where Jake Gittes saves Evelyn Mulwray and escapes with her and her daughter off to Mexico and rescues them. And Roman Polanski just could not live with that ending, just didn't feel that the corruption and the rot roiling through that milieu could get off so easily. And so it was his idea to sacrifice the Faye Dunaway character. And at the end of that movie, what probably do we remember more if we so. And it was interesting. I was reading a piece by Emily Nussbaum in the New Yorker about the legacy of Sex and the City, the TV show, and the idea that we don't really talk about that show the way that we did when it was first playing on HBO. Unlike other shows, which we really do still talk about, whether it's The Sopranos, whether it's The Wire, different dramas, of course, but still. And her argument was that Sex and the City just it has kind of trailed off the radar in syndication right now. And as a talking point for people, as a reference point in the culture, is because its ending, unlike other series enders, was happy, was really positive. She got what she wanted. They didn't make the hard choice and have her go off on her own. They didn't have a kind of major compromise or break happen in that last episode. And so everything was kind of settled and tied up in a bow. And maybe because of that, the show is not maybe taken as seriously in a way. I look at Girls and I don't necessarily see it. I see it not as conquering anything, regardless of the last episode of the last season. I see it as people just struggling to get by in an era of diminished returns, where there really is not a future at all. I live with someone who's roughly that same age. I've been living with someone who's 27, and it is it's kind of frightening what they're up against economically and what that future really does realistically look like. The idea of conquering or getting what you want is a long way away. It's got to be different, or it's got to be something different.
Well, I think it's what's fun about working for HBO and being able to blur the line between comedy and drama and tragedy is that we don't even know what the show is tonally. We just try to be truthful. Some episodes are funnier than other episodes. Some episodes are heartbreaking or painful. And that's something that you can do when a show is successful enough to have found its audience and not be terrified of getting canceled every week. And that is what is exciting about the show. It evolves based on what Lena and the writers are thinking about. Sex and the City was intended to be more fun. It did tackle a lot of serious issues. And when we think of ideas, 90% of the time we think, oh, Sex and the City did a great episode about this. Maybe we should try to think of a different story. But I think its intention was to be a little more comic. And we probably lean a little more tragic because of what you're saying. It was a different time when they made Sex and the City, and I don't think people did feel that sense of diminishing returns. Kids came out of college and they thought they were going to get the great job, and now I think people are telling young people, you better start your own company because you're actually not going to get a job even with your college degree, and it just changes everything for young people, and especially for creative people who we talk about in the show a lot, who are dealing with the 500 channel universe, and you can be creative, but there's no way to make money at it. There's a lot of humor in the show, especially coming up this season, about can you survive even if you do publish your book? I mean, she gets an advance of $5,000, I think, for her ebook. So a lot of the show is about, do your dreams make economic sense? That's why Ray is working at a pizza place, and they all have these jobs to try to support creative lifestyles, and it clearly is not working. And that is something that I think is new to television and does connect with the idea that on Freaks and Geeks we had this sense that most of these kids are in trouble. That Nick is not a good drummer, and his dad wants him to go into the armed services, and James Franco's character, Daniel, has no sense of what he's going to do, and that other than Lindsay, who's probably going to figure it out, and her brother will, most of them, may never, have their dreams come true.
But network TV does, regardless. It seems like it needs to fulfill a kind of idea of hope, regardless of what's swirling around in the content itself, that there has to be that kind of light. Whereas in cable TV, that doesn't seem to be the case. If you did an NBC version of Girls, I don't know if you'd have anything left. The originality of Hannah's character is that she is a mess, and she's not always likable, and she's wrong, flat out wrong sometimes. Yeah. A very complicated young person that we really haven't seen. I don't even think we've seen in current movies.
And aggressively wrong. She yes. almost wants to be wrong so she has something to write about, which we talk about in the writer's room. Someone who wants experience. She wants something to happen so she has something to write about. So when faced with a decision that left is probably the right way and right could be a disaster, most of the time she's going to go right. It's also an obsessive-compulsive thinker. It's somebody that has a hard time settling down and being happy for all sorts of reasons. And I think it is painful for some people to watch because she's so unsettled and a mess most of the time, even though she has a good heart. And sometimes you wonder how good her heart is. And there's some episodes where she does things that are not nice to other people. But that is what is interesting. And when we tried to do things like that on Freaks and Geeks, we accomplished it, but we were canceled after 18 episodes. They right. just didn't pay attention to us because they were so against what we were doing that they abandoned us and then canceled us. So we were able to do it. But if we were on cable, who knows, maybe we would have survived. Or if we were on right now, we wouldn't even seem like a choice that was that strange. But back then, it seemed bananas to make Freaks and Geeks. And even Undeclared, the show we did after that, when there was very little single-camera comedy happening on television, they didn't even know where to put us because everything on TV was a sitcom with an audience. There was only 2 other single-camera shows, so it was hard to survive in that atmosphere. It's amazing that this atmosphere exists in television now, where there's actually a profit motive in creativity and complex characters. This has never happened before, where the audience has demanded more shows like The Wire and Boardwalk Empire and The Sopranos. They're telling the creative people, go farther, go deeper, and then we all succeed because of that. I mean, think about how weird that is. And now you have Amazon trying to do shows, you have Netflix, so now there's competition to get the most creative people and allowing them to do what they want to do. That's why it's an amazing moment in television. The profit motive isn't there in film in the same way, because you're never going to be Iron Man, trying to do, short-term 12. But you can do short-term 12 type thing and become Girls and be very successful.
Right. I remember when I had sold a pilot to HBO in 2009, or the idea of a pilot. I hadn't written it yet. They liked the idea, and they bought it. And I wrote the pilot, and Sue Nagel at the time was very upset with the pilot. Couldn't believe that I was as graphic as I was with the way men talked when women weren't around, when a bunch of guys were just talking in their kind of frat house-like apartment. Did not like the graphicness of the sex scenes between the young people, felt that they were too, quote-unquote, rapey. The first time that I heard the term rapey was in my main character's a girl in Manhattan. This was like 5 years ago when I still believed in the possibility that a girl out of college could maybe get an apartment in Manhattan with 2 other girls. No, now that the show's being written, it can't take place there because Manhattan is a gated community basically now. So we addressed some of these issues. There were not a lot of, I guess, people at HBO at the time. I don't know why I find this story so ridiculous, but everyone was upset by a set piece scene where a bunch of guys are sitting around talking about girls on the internet or whatever, and very anatomically incorrect, and it teetered over. But they couldn't find anybody at HBO at that point who was straight to verify if that scene could really happen. It was kind of like a bunch of, women and gay men. And so they had to find some straight guy down on the second floor or something to read it and verify it. So I rejiggered the sex scenes. I took it down a notch to kind of placate them. And then when I watched Girls, I got a little pissed. I got a little pissed because Girls went there. And I don't know if it's necessarily because maybe it was from a female perspective that the explicitness of that show became a kind of maybe a more honest take on that, and so that it made it more palatable. And that's why it moved through easily at HBO. Or whether we just have gotten there as a culture in a matter of 2 or 3 years. We can show Adam Driver's character coming on his girlfriend, and we can show that semen. And it's a kind of a moment. It's a great kind of taboo-breaking moment in TV. I don't think exploitive at all. I think just honest and real. And I thought that whole scene, which there was, of course, a lot of feminist backlash against, which just seemed ridiculous to me. It's the scene where Adam Driver's character kind of has, quote-unquote, rough sex with his girlfriend, and she kind of isn't into it, but they go through with it anyway. I don't know. I think that Girls really does break taboos in a way that kind of weren't allowed maybe 3 or 4 years ago. I don't know.
I think that it probably... I think it's hard to show awful male behavior and sexual behavior or sex that borders on violence, for obvious reasons. I think that Lena is exploring female sexuality and those blurred lines, but it's also from the point of view of a young person who doesn't seem to be victimizing anyone but herself. And so that is probably a little less scary in terms of exploration than a bunch of guys behaving badly. I know even in the light ways that I've had guys behave badly in my movies, sometimes I get criticism for it, and I always felt like what I was saying was, don't act like this. I mean, I'm showing it to you. I'm not saying do it.
Right.
I'm saying this is, when we did Knocked Up, this is immaturity. And now he's going to have a baby, so he can't be like this anymore. He's not allowed to. He has to deal with that his situation has completely changed. But I want to show, in a comedic way, how awful and immature guys can be. Then some people confuse that and think I'm just saying, or I'm just showing it because that's what I believe. But really, I find it hysterical.
This is incredibly entertaining.
Yeah, I mean, and it's the same. But I think there's a lot of people out there who don't know the difference. They don't get the satire. So they see American Psycho and they don't actually understand what you're talking about, and they just see violence. And those people you're never going to please. I find them to be a small minority, but they're very loud. And with what Lena does, you can debate every choice she makes. And because the character is making so many terrible choices, you can get upset about it. But people do make terrible choices. People do have sex with people who are not treating them well and go through with it. And that doesn't mean Lena's saying you should go through with it. And in fact, what most people didn't pick up on was that the following week, after Shiri Appleby had the terrible sex scene with Adam, in the next episode, she has him completely trained to do exactly what she wants him to do. And he's finding it boring. And she's going, go up, go down, bear down. And you see that he's in this hell of having been completely defeated by her. So that was an aspect of it that was important to us. Yes, she did it once. And then she trained him.
Right. You were talking about how we debated a lot about which way to go with the character, or you debate about her character all the time as a viewer. You debate about I want that. I don't want everything answered for me. I don't want a character to be completely whitewashed so that I'm told how to react constantly. And I think you're right about the American Psycho thing, where people did misread that book as something other than it wasn't. Unlike you, my response is like, well, so what? I mean, I kind of don't care. There's nothing I can do about that.
But the years reveal it.
The years reveal
it. When we did The Cable Guy years ago, which is a very strange movie that we're really proud of, I had lunch with Warren Beatty, and at the lunch I was talking about how the critical aspect of it is painful when you hear from people who don't get it at all. And he said, you really don't know if a project is good or has any life for 10 years. You have to table the entire discussion for 10 years, and then you'll have a better sense of it yourself. You'll see how it's aged, what people have come to think of it. And I found that to be the case over and over again with things that I like and things that I've made, that sometimes 10 years later I realize something wasn't good that I did, that I defended at the time, and other times people really come around on certain projects and champion them. Do
sometimes you like things that you've done more than you did at the time that you did it? Or is it usually like, I like it less? Because I find myself liking things a little less than I did when I was engaged with it and releasing it and putting it out there.
I tend to like everything less as time passes. I see all of the choices. I'll be mad about some music cue I switched out at the last minute. I'll watch The 4-Year-Old Virgin and I'll think, why did I take out that In Excess song and put in the Asia song? And sometimes the whole piece just feels. I get disconnected from it. I actually, after I see things a few years later, I don't even feel like I made it. I get that distant from it. I don't have any sense that it came from me. But certain things do age well. Every once in a while, I'll watch a Freaks and Geeks episode, and I'll feel like, wow, that is a miracle that came out that well, and that we were able to say that. But it's a funny relationship. I wish I could just, watch a few of my movies, get in a great mood, be really proud of myself, and go off and make another one. But usually, if I do that, I'm really bummed out, and I just think, yeah, people were right about that. I just beat up on myself.
Earlier this year, I found myself in this strange position of watching a 3-hour documentary called Los Angeles Plays Itself by Tom Anderson, I was in Palm Springs. I was outside. I had my iPad. And I did something that I never thought I would do. I watched a 3-hour documentary about the history of how Los Angeles is represented in film. Totally fascinating. There's no talking heads. It's just clips from starting in about the 30s all the way up to now. Oh, well, actually, the movie was completed in the 90s, so the 90s. And it's just riveting. I thought I would only watch this in my bedroom on my big flat screen TV, or I would never watch a film on my iPad. I would never sit. I did, and I liked it. It wasn't that bad. You put your headphones on.
Yeah.
I was in a Chase lounge, underneath an umbrella somewhere, and I was outside in the shade, and I liked the experience. And I am pretty much, and I still am to a degree, it's changing, a purist about wanting to see movies on a giant screen in a theater. And that, again, and I discussed this with Connie a little bit, the idea that the movie controls you is much more powerful to me than the idea of you controlling the movie. And that makes it a much more kind of overpowering experience. But that was a kind of, I hate the term game changer, but a little bit of a game changer. The fact that I could watch and be held by a movie on an iPad. Now, I know much, much younger people would go, okay, big deal. But for someone, I don't know, my age, I didn't think that was possible. But then again, I didn't think it was possible that I was going to be able to be engaged by movies that were not going to be distributed theatrically, but that I would just have to watch them on demand. There was no other way to see them. And that is just now a fact of watching content. The idea being that I don't care how great your entertainment system is, it's not going to be Theater 3 of the ArcLight. It's just not going to be any probably big theatrical venue. And it's just, and people like to brag and say, oh, no, my home theater system is just as good. It usually isn't. But how do you watch most of your content now? Do you go to theaters? Do you watch it mostly at home? I know you have kids. It must make it more difficult.
I will go to the movie theater, and I will watch it on an iPad. And it depends on the movie. I think that there are some great experiences on an iPad. I think it's because the sound is so good that if you've got a great set of Bose headphones and you're watching an old episode of The Sopranos, you're in heaven. But there are certain, if you're going to go see Captain Phillips or Gravity, you should be in a movie theater to see it. I just saw The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, which was incredible, and it would be a crime to watch it on your iPad. But I think there's a lot of stuff that's great on an iPad. I can't tell you the joy I've experienced watching Louis episodes on planes. I mean, there's nothing more fun than that. Just that quiet. But yes, you will shut off a movie on that iPad. You will pause 27 times in the middle of a movie that you should not pause in the middle of, and you will break up that experience. Sometimes I think with my movies, people they are long. I'm happy that they can pause and go take a piss at home or on an iPad. And I feel like some of them, the crowd experience of comedies is very important, and it's great to be in a crowd. But sometimes it is great to pause in the middle of This Is 40 and get a sandwich, and it may make you like the movie more if your attention span is shredded.
Yes, right. A movie that benefited greatly from being in an audience was The Heat, a movie that I, for some reason, was not really on my radar, and it was at the Academy about, I think, the Saturday after it opened, and the reviews were iffy. But I went and thinking, okay, it's 2 o'clock, I'm going to be out of here by probably 2:30, 2:35. The audience started laughing, and Melissa McCarthy's performance began to kind of explode for me. It was this kind of comic id being released, and I thought it was just completely fearless. And I don't know if I found the movie particularly that funny, but she started making it more and more funny. And the more that this packed audience, and if you've been in the Academy Theater, of course, it's a huge, and it was pretty full. It really started carrying me through the movie, that collective, this collective experience that were going on, and people's reactions kind of affecting mine. Like, oh, there was something that I kind of didn't get, and then it got kind of a medium laugh, and then I realized, oh, that's funny, and then I laughed too. But then I gotta say, we were watching it. My boyfriend, who's 27, was watching it when it became available on demand, because I said, oh, it's funny. I thought, and you got to watch Melissa McCarthy in it. She's great. And it helps carry the movie. But I was in my office, and my bedroom's down the hall, and he said, "This isn't funny." And I said, "No, what are you talking about?" And I got up, and I went into the back room, and I stood there, and the scenes that I had laughed at in the ominous quiet of my bedroom with someone who was not responding to the movie at all really put a palatable chill over that experience. And I kept wondering, well, God, what if I never saw this movie again? What if I had just experienced it in that perfect condition, surrounded by slightly older people, of course, but that perfect condition of being in the Academy, watching it? That really, the audience for a comedy really does impact, in a way, your movie-going experience.
It's also how you like watching comedies. I mean, I like watching comedies alone also, so I'll laugh at the heat with the crowd and without the crowd. It doesn't bother me at all to not have that energy and momentum with the crowd. And I think there's something really fun about noticing everything yourself. So we've been watching Anchorman 2,
right.
Which I produced. It was written by Will Ferrell and Adam McKay, and Adam directed it, so we watch it a lot. And we see it with crowds, and the crowds go crazy. I mean, Adam and Will did an amazing job, and the movie is riotously funny. Mm-hmm. But when we watch it alone in the editing room, we just giggle. We just notice these weird little things we don't notice on the big screen with the crowd. Like, look what Carell's doing in the background. Look what Dave Koechner's doing. And we laugh just as hard by ourselves. But I think everyone's different that way. That's why if you see Lost in America, the opening of it is Albert Brooks in bed, and Larry King is interviewing Rex Reed, and Rex Reed is talking about how he likes watching comedies alone. And clearly this is Albert Brooks' nightmare, and that's why it's the opening of his film. But I think it's different for everybody. But some of the best experiences I've ever had is, we're seeing movies like Something About Mary with a packed house and the place going apeshit. Just Airplane. I remember seeing Airplane as a kid.
Yeah.
Or Young Frankenstein.
Animal House for me was a pivotal. Yeah.
And you remember those collective experiences. I remember seeing Ghostbusters opening weekend, and it was a rock concert when that movie opened up. And that's the fun part for us when we test these movies and we show them to people for the first time, and people haven't seen the marketing. They don't know anything about it, and you get a real pure reaction to it before all the marketing gives away the jokes. It's really, really fun and helpful to us. But everything lands on video, and you have to make things that you feel are going to work on video, because there's a little 3-month window in the theaters, and then there's the next 100 years sitting, in people's TV sets whenever they want to watch it. So I'm always aware of watching these movies and watching them as a solo experience. Some guy looking at it on his iPad under a tree, and I hope it works that way also. But I don't. How am I going to know? I'm so bored of it by the time it comes out, I can't tell anyway.
All right, something happened this weekend. Paul Walker died. Terrible. I was a big Paul Walker fan, and I immediately, as we are prone to do now in the culture, I immediately went to tweet something about it because it affected me. We're all out in the desert, a bunch of us about to go out to dinner when the news came in, and it was just like we were all completely shocked, and in that way of a celebrity that we don't know that well, but we liked a lot, we were all incredibly bummed, and it was kind of put a pallor on things for a while before we started to, have cocktails and kind of like talk about our favorite Paul Walker movies, whether it was, Varsity Blues or Joyride, which I remember very fondly. And we were all pretty much, taken down by it. The next morning, someone came into the kitchen and said, "Oh, they're on Reddit. There are already like 3,000 jokes, 3,000 Paul Walker jokes. And people are, posting them again and again and again." And I was with a bunch of writers, and we're all pretty much hardened people, pretty cynical. There had been a lot of blackly humorous talk on Friday and on Saturday, but Sunday morning when that came in and we looked over on the computer, There was that little bit of cry of too soon. The old comic lament that you can't make that joke before. Yeah. And it was disturbing. It was a kind of disturbing moment. And I'm really pretty much for anything, free speech, whatever. But I don't know. I felt a tiny line was crossed there, and then had to just wake up to the fact that this is where we are, more or less. Now, I mean, the idea that what is too soon, or is it just a morality? Is it just a kind of morality? And again, as you touched upon earlier, that idea that you can hide anonymously and then put that stuff out there rather than put your own name, your real avatar, or your picture on that. I don't know. I'm sure your reaction is just that's kind of disgusting. But what do you think that gets at in the culture?
This all relates back to Fruitvale Station. See how I'm going to tie it all back up?
Yes.
I think that life is terrifying, and this idea that you can be at a charity event helping other people and be a beloved person, and a moment later it's over, is so terrifying that people use humor as a way to hide from it, deal with it, process it. Now, some people will never make a joke. I don't like those types of jokes. I don't go near that. That doesn't make me feel better. But I've also learned to understand that, some people want to make that joke instantly. It's the only way they can get through the night, or the only way they could not touch their own heart. They don't want to open their own heart, because if you started crying about it, you would never stop. And if you really went all the way with how you feel about him and his life and the loss, and how you feel about your own life and the precarious position we're all in. And so it is a coping mechanism for some people, not for everybody. And so I've learned to not let it bother me a ton. It probably used to bother me more in the past. It's such a common part of our culture that, to me, I don't even register it that much. But I do think it's why I like Fruitvale Station, because I like the idea of someone saying, "Don't move on so fast." We move on to the next issue. On Twitter, there's 8,000 news stories every 15 minutes. And so you move on from these tragedies, and you don't stay with your pain. You don't stay with your compassion and your empathy and your concern to do something or spread some kind energy around it. It's nice when people don't make the joke and have the moment and think, what did that person mean to me? How much joy did that person bring me? And what a great guy who was doing so many positive things in the world. And even with Fruitvale Station, with somebody who was, not as together, it's good to take a moment to reflect on people's humanity before reading the next Glenn Greenwald thing about the NSA scandal, or the next snarky comment from somebody.
Which leads us to, I'd like to just briefly talk about, without it getting too contentious, Short Term 12.
You're going to go with Short Term 12? Don't do it. Don't do it. I love that movie. People, go see it. Put your fingers in your ears now. Quickly.
No, I think what you liked about it, I liked too. Mm-hmm. And again, it's a movie about, I guess, the counselors' lives of a group of, I guess, what would you call that?
Well, it's a facility where kids are put when the system isn't sure what to do with them for a period of time. So right. In between foster care, or in between being sent back to your parents who might be in prison or something, there's a facility where they just put you up, and it's a holding facility of some sort.
And the movie centers on a couple of the counselors. Actually, they are a couple, a man and woman, who are dealing with these kids. The movie is pretty well made. It is, however, about that, so I don't know really where else you go with that story than what the movie does with it. And you could argue that it is a perfect piece of Sundance propaganda kind of, good liberal movie making. Well done, but it has all the tropes of the indie film. That's slightly better.
But let me ask you a question. Idea of liberal movie making, or movie making with a positive idea behind it, is that the thing that is a recurring thing that bothers you, that you have a sense of people having a message they're trying to put out there and it feels trite in some way, or why doesn't like you rather go a back door to get the same idea across?
That is unfortunately why I'm kind of stuck right now with movies, and because I see the front doors open a little bit too wide. And it really, there's no spoiler here for Short Term 12. It's well done, and at times I think there's a sequence where a young girl reveals through a short story she wrote that she'd been perhaps molested. It's very powerful. The octopus story, the octopus and the shark story. And there are nice moments throughout. Its ending, and again, there's no spoiler here, revolves around a repetition of the opening scene where one of the characters tells a long story about someone who was at the facility. And you're listening to the story, and the story this counselor is telling about a kid who had been at the facility and is now out, and he had run into him, is momentarily kind of powerful, and then it's very kind of showbizy. It gives you that kind of gut punch of like, oh, everything's better now. Everything has been resolved. And it really was a story about the most troubled kid there. And you realize, oh, that's been set up. That's been set up through the suicide. Mm-hmm. We're all going to get to this point where we're going to get this redemptive monologue, and it's going to make us feel really good. I see that happening in a lot of movies now. In the ads, you hear life-affirming, joyous, the feel-good event of the year. And that seems to be what people want. They don't want anything that's messy or dark. I'm not saying fully. I'm just saying it has to be within a kind of context, either a historical context or based on a true story or something. But when it comes down to movies that don't go that way, audiences seem to just not know what to do with it. They just don't have a clue. So that ending of Short Term 12 bothered me, even though overall I thought it was okay.
Because this is something we debate all the time. We're always talking about, well, what is the ending? What's the honest, truthful ending? And my issue with that is that I think that the messy ending or the really dark ending is also an obvious choice. There's only three ways to go. There's happy, there's kind of happy, and then there's unhappy, or there's confusing. So when I'm sitting with writers and we go, how do we end this episode of the show? We know we can only go a few ways, and there's the way that's more complex and doesn't resolve things. But even that's a choice that's as obvious as the happy choice.
But doesn't each one have varying levels of complexity and happiness and unhappiness? It's just the one that feels too happy. Real. Yeah, I felt that way at the end of Short Term 12. Does the movie earn it or not? Sure, I don't know. But it did. It was a distraction for me. It became a big distraction. I go, oh, that's just pure showbiz. That is just not. That is a real feel-good ending placed on a movie that is, kind of all the time bursting with pain.
But I guess this is where I disagree. I feel like life is good, it's bad, it's good, it's bad, it's in the middle, it's good, it's bad. And in a movie can end, you could decide where you want to jump out. That's why The Sopranos ending is so great, because he's going, it doesn't matter. We're just jumping out.
Right.
I could show him get killed, I could show him get off, but then it just continues. So that's why it is, I think, a brilliant ending. Because he did sit in the room and go, happy, sad, middle. What are we going to do? But in a movie like that has so much pain, what I take from it when it ends on a happier moment is, and then there's tomorrow. And then there's the next kid who tries to kill himself. And then what happens to this kid? Like, I don't assume that kid's fine because he seems okay in the last scene. I don't think that couple is fine because in that moment. But in life, you try your best to make it work. And then more shit comes up. So, for instance, with This Is 40, and Leslie and I would debate the end all the time. And she always preferred a more positive ending for the couple. And to me, it was a positive ending, which is they had all these problems, and they clearly love each other. Sometimes it goes to a dark place, and then they find their way back to each other, and they do adore each other. But they also drive each other crazy, and so now we're ending the movie in a moment when they're connected. But we know this is probably going to happen every 3 months for them. Or the end of Knocked Up. They drive off into the sunset, but we know they don't get along that great. And so all they're doing is trying. Mm-hmm. And I like that as a message. Like, we're just trying. I also like There Will Be Blood. I like, killing the guy with the bowling pin at the end also. But I don't think that type of a choice is any less valid than the happy jump out point, if you feel that it's organic and you've earned it in some sense. And on TV, what's great is you can be complex. Like when we did the episode where Adam Driver runs to Lena when she's having her OCD meltdown. Mm-hmm. Some people said, "Oh, you sold out the show. It's a happy ending." And I said, well, she's having a nervous breakdown and he loves her and he's there for her. It doesn't mean the next day is easy. But he did come to her. And the truth is, for most people, when things go shithouse, someone does run to take care of them. Right. And it's almost a comical, it's almost satirical about happy endings in movies also. We knew it was ridiculous, and that was what we were enjoying about it, to just go over the top when you don't expect us to.
As a rabid viewer of the show and a huge fan of the show, that's how I read it. I also read it that you kind of got it both ways. You got it as both a satirical thing and a legitimate moment of connection between two characters that we really like.
They had that moment, and then they have the other moments. And so some episodes end with Adam Driver getting hit by a truck and then breaking up, and then that's it. And then you have good days and bad days. But in a movie, you can show all of them. In a movie, in a TV show, you can show all of them, because you have a lot of episodes. In a movie, you have to pick one. So with Funny People, Adam is so resistant to growing up and changing and not being self-centered that I thought, and it was my first thought for the movie, all he can accomplish at the end of the movie is to not kick Seth Rogen out of his life. And the only thing he realizes at the end is, I should be a little giving, and he wrote this guy a joke. And as a young comedian, the older guy never wrote you a joke. You would write them jokes. And that is his gesture of, I'm going to try. And in a way, it's not that upbeat an ending. It's just, it's going to be really hard, and maybe he'll get there, maybe he won't. But at least he doesn't tell Seth to fuck off and never talk to him again, which is what many people do. And those choices about endings, they're so difficult. And when people pull them off, when they really work, like Terms of Endearment is the greatest ending of all time, because he has this cancer story and the mother dies and they play it for real, and at the end there's this moment, and Jack Nicholson is with the son who just lost his mother, and he just starts showing around his house and says, "Hey, let me show you my pool," and you just start bawling because it's hope, and then the movie's over. And that's an improvisation that happened on the day. James Brooks told me, I asked James Brooks about it, like, how did that happen? And he said, well, we were going to shoot the funeral, and I said to everybody who worked on the movie, go to the Rothko Museum. I think they were in Houston. I think it'll get you in the right spirit and the right mood for this scene. And he said, Nicholson did that, that language, that's so magical. And he said, and you know what? Only one person went to the Rothko Museum, and it was Nicholson. And sometimes those moments happen, and you're always searching for that way to not hit it on the nose, to not be too happy, to not tie it up too clean. And it is a miracle when someone thinks of can pull that off in that way.
I'm curious, what was the original ending for This Is 40 then? Did you have another? Did you go further with it, or
no? That was always the ending, that they would go. They would just go see Ryan Adams, and to me, it was a metaphor for the fact that they like different kinds of music. They're different people, and at the end, she's, what do you want to do? And we know the last thing in the world she wants to do is go to see a band he likes, because she doesn't like the bands he likes, and then she does, and then they find something that they both agree on, and they have a moment, and you realize, well, sometimes they do like the same band. There is that area where they fully connect. I mean, we all bring our issues to the table, and it's hard when they have to deal with your issues and you have to deal with their issues. But there's also that place where it is perfect, and you are there most of the time you're there. It's just when you're not there, it can be very complicated.
So when you said that Leslie wanted it to be a little bit lighter, was that in terms of the writing or the shooting, or what did she wanted it?
I think ultimately, we got there and there was a lot of debate about a lot of moments in the last act, but she thought she wanted it to be a little bit more positive about the couple and for the audience to pull out of it in a way that had more light or more energy or more comedy. And for me, I probably didn't go as far as she would have gone, because for my taste, I thought, well, this feels like what the vibe would be. And this felt truthful to me, that they're in love and they're together, but they're also a little bit exhausted, and it's sweet and they're connected, and it ends. I couldn't get to the place that so disgusts you, which is the rockin' song that you feel is unearned and everything's fine. And so I have that debate on every project I ever have, because your reaction to certain movies, that is what I'm concerned about. How can I earn it? And some movies you can earn it. You can. Bridesmaids, you can have Wilson Phillips come out at the end and she drives off into the sunset with Chris O'Dowd. But if you notice, that's such a beautiful scene that Paul Feig directed there, because Chris O'Dowd's waiting for her, and their conversation isn't very on the nose. They connect, and there's a couple of funny jokes, but they basically just talk about him trying to eat the cake that she left for him, and that he fought like a raccoon for the cake. He makes like a sweet joke, but the joke is his way of saying, I'm sorry, let's reconnect. And then as he puts her in the car, he grabs her head and pushes her down like she's a perp. And then they drive off. And it's not the music cranking end, and it's actually more effective because it's quiet and they're having a real connection at the end. But that's so hard. Every movie you're trying to crack that nut.
And yet you're about to make another one.
Yes.
What makes you decide? Why? I mean, I can imagine you just have so much. Well, maybe you don't have so many things on your plate that suddenly you gravitate towards, I'm directing a movie now. I'm going to direct this movie with Amy Schumer, right?
Yes.
How does that decision come about? How do you decide, okay, well, I'm going to direct this movie now, instead of just writing it or producing, or how does this...
I've never directed a movie that I didn't write. I've been developing the script with Amy for over a year, and I'm attracted to talented people who are willing to go there emotionally and reveal themselves. And I'm really impressed with Amy as a writer and as a person. She just seems like someone that it'll be great to collaborate with. And the moment I find most interesting in the work is this moment where someone's really talented, they know who they are, but they just haven't made that movie yet. They haven't written that movie yet because they have so much passion to accomplish it, and they have courage. They're not spoiled. There's no sense of self-entitlement. There's no diva aspect to it. They just want to kick ass and make something great. And it happened with Steve Carell when we did The 40-Year-Old Virgin, and Seth and Catherine when we did Knocked Up. I mean, to be in that, to be in the bunker with those people is really fun. And it's also a great challenge. How do you make people love this person for 2 hours and laugh at them and connect with them emotionally? Who are they? What can we find out about them that people don't know from their previous work? And I guess that's what interests me most. It's cracking the code on people.